Let's jump right into it. 8. Knocker-uppers. Here's a question. How did people wake up on time before alarm clocks were a thing? Well, they literally hired strangers to poke them awake with a stick. These knocker-uppers roamed the streets at ungodly hours, tapping windows until you got up. It was a real job, and not even a rare one. Some used pea shooters, some used fishing rods, and some would keep smacking the glass until you acknowledged them, like an ancient notification system. The bigger question, though, is who woke up the knocker-upper? Did they have a knocker-upper? At some point, the chain of stick-wielding insomniacs had to end. Today, the role has basically been replaced by a combination of iPhones and crippling anxiety. 7. Powder monkeys. Imagine being 12 years old, and your job is to sprint across a battleship during cannon fire, carrying bags of gunpowder. That was the life of a powder monkey. They were picked for being small and fast, but mostly because no one really cared if they exploded. They darted back and forth under enemy fire, dodging shrapnel, while holding literal bags of boom. Basically, they were the unpaid interns of naval warfare, except the exposure they got was usually to cannonballs. If you survived long enough, you could maybe become an actual sailor, but odds are you were just turned into deck confetti. 6. Leech collectors. Before modern medicine, doctors thought leeches could cure everything from fevers to headaches, which created a booming industry for leech collectors. Usually women from poor communities, they waded into swamps barefoot, waiting for leeches to latch on. Then they'd peel the slimy bloodsuckers off and toss them in a bucket for medical use. No tools required. The job was miserable, but the demand was high. Europe went through millions of leeches every year. It was literally the most draining profession you could have, in every sense of the word. 5. Fullers. In ancient Rome, cleaning clothes was a whole industry, but detergent wasn't really a thing yet. So what did they use? Stale urine. Yes, vats of the stuff. Fullers were workers whose job was to stomp on fabric in these urine-filled tubs to whiten and clean it. The ammonia in urine actually did help clean and whiten fabrics, but it also meant that Roman laundromats often smelled like a public bathroom on a Taco Tuesday. The smell alone could knock out a centurion. And here's the kicker. People actually paid taxes on urine. Roman Emperor Vespasian saw the industry was profitable and started charging a urine tax on the distribution of urine from Rome's public urinals. Which means not only were workers ankle deep in the worst footbath imaginable, they were funding the empire while doing it. 4. Sin eaters. When someone died in medieval Europe, families had a problem. What if their loved one didn't get into heaven? The solution? Hire a sin eater. This poor soul's job was to sit by the corpse, eating bread and drinking ale, symbolically absorbing the dead person's sins. Sin eaters were usually social outcasts. They lived on the margins of society and almost never got buried properly themselves. But hey, at least they got free beer. 3. Resurrectionists. Up until a couple of hundred years ago, doctors needed corpses to study, but the law wasn't supplying enough. So, resurrectionists made a career out of grave robbing. They'd sneak into cemeteries at night to dig up fresh bodies and deliver them to medical schools. They even had tricks to avoid harsher penalties, like leaving behind jewelry or clothing, since in the eyes of the law, stealing possessions was worse than stealing grandma. Families eventually started guarding graves with cages, watchtowers, and even spring-loaded guns to keep the snatchers away. The job eventually ended after the 1832 Anatomy Act made cadavers legally available, and science finally stopped relying on the weird guy who spent his nights yanking corpses out of the dirt. 2. Whipping boy. The Middle Ages gave us many brilliant ideas: castles, cathedrals, and the whipping boy. A whipping boy was a servant assigned to a young prince. Whenever the royal brat messed up, the whipping boy got beaten instead because the royals were too important to be punished. The idea was that the prince would feel bad watching his friend suffer, which is a bold assumption, considering most royals were trained to have the empathy of a rock. 1. Groom of the stool. This was an actual position in the English royal court, where a servant's duty was to help the king use the bathroom. Yes, wiping the royal rear was an official government post. The position also involved keeping track of bowel movements and even managing the royal chamber pot. On paper, it looks like the worst LinkedIn entry ever, but weirdly enough, it was considered an honor. The groom was one of the king's closest confidants, privy to secrets nobody else heard, and to things nobody else wanted to see. Some grooms even became powerful political figures, which just proves that networking works in the strangest places. And if you thought these bad jobs from history were weird, just wait until you see how creepy history gets in this video. If you enjoyed this one, press the like button and subscribe for more.